Okay, hello. My name is Chris Short. I run Alpaca Ranch Recording down here in lovely Central Florida, the greater Orlando area. Somebody posted on the Plugin Alliance Facebook page, Plugin Alliance audio files, that we wanted to talk a little bit about some of their plugins. So I'm going to start with one that I'm really familiar with, which is the SSL 4000 6000 EG plugin that they've got. If you hear any background noise, that's my cat. She is crucial in any YouTube video and also mixing thing that we do. So let's get it going. Okay, so a local artist that I've worked with a lot by the name of Robert Wilson was nice enough to let us use some raw recordings we got from him. We had his band in, man, it was a while ago at this point, I think, but live drums, live bass, and then live rhythm and live lead guitar. None of this stuff, and live vocals, actually, I forgot about that. None of this stuff was supposed to be final by any means, but it's a pretty good example because it's raw. There's no editing on it. There's only processing I've got right now is just an SSL compressor, which is the Waves version. I don't have the Plugin Alliance version, but it's pretty basic stuff. And the only reason I'm using this is because I've just kind of cut my teeth on a 6000 EG plus. So these guys just kind of make sense to me. The only other thing is this output here, which really just feeds the stream that I'm recording right now, and you can hear it kind of do its thing here. It's kind of like Americana alt-rock type stuff, but Robert's super easy to work with, so I figured he'd be down with letting us show some noise off for him. And like as you can see, all the levels and pans are even at 0. Well, hold on, no, we panned the hi-hat and the ride over, that was it. But everything else is just dead 0. Nothing happening. So this is probably the most boring version of this song you're ever going to hear. So in order to do that, let's just pan this guy out just a little bit, get a little bit of space happening, so that it makes life a little bit less horrifying, and just get the compressor to do just a little bit, keep it from blowing up my headphones. And we'll just bring the vocals up just a scotch, because I really like to reference the vocals as we go through the song, because it's just easier for me to hear, like the different sections. Like if a band's like, hey, let's go to the chorus, sometimes you can just be like, oh, it's probably that. So anyway, actually, since we have the vocals, we're talking about them, let's pull up our friend, BX Console SSL 4000E, and I have about like 3 or 4 different versions of this particular one, but I super dig this one. We're going to use it on vocals just to really bring the vocals to the front so that I can kind of tell where I am in the song. I haven't listened to this in a long time. So I'll just go through some super basic stuff for vocals. Usually don't end up using the gate here at all. So I'll bring the range to 0 and the threshold all the way down, and that usually just gets rid of it. You can kind of keep an eye on the gain reduction right there. We'll look at more transient focus information in a little bit, and that'll make a lot more sense. But right now for vocals, like there's just really not a huge need for it. So this vocal is live, and it's definitely on the low side. There we go. Oh, that's funny. All right. Nothing like a bad patch cable in the middle of your YouTube stream. Okay, cool. So this is really low. Volume-wise, you can even kind of see the meters aren't really doing much. The one thing about SSL stuff is you kind of have to beat the crap out of it for it to get to be cool. I remember when I was mixing on an analog desk, if this little light here didn't start lighting up when drum transients hit, the drums just weren't any fun. I mean, then again, I was mixing a lot of like heavier stuff, so the drums needed a kick, and this guy, just a tiny little bit of distortion on the top of the transient will actually allow you to like kind of fake it to make it louder, give it a little bit more richness, especially because at the time we were cutting to a Sony 3348, I want to say. So that thing it sounded great, but it's still digital. You didn't have any of the benefits of like a tape machine or anything, but we had the big old 56 channel 6000, so that was pretty fun. So anyway, to do a basic little EQ on vocals, and I'm going to get more into the signal flow and why this was such a big deal in the industry when it came out in a second, but I know, because it's a live vocal, I know there's going to be crud down here, and Robert's got a pretty gravelly voice, so there's a lot going on the low end here. So I'm just gonna high pass it around 70, 80, you know, just to get it started with, and it's super low again. So let's just crank the input gain up, and you start to hear a little bit more of him. Like here, plus 10, and why not? And then I've always found this the THD button on the plugin alliance stuff to be pretty subtle, but you know, I'll just crank it all up, and you can feel a little bit of the woolliness and the low mids kind of come forward, but it's not going to give you like a dramatic distortion thing like a Sound Toys Decapitator would, or something like that, or a Sans amp, for example. And this is never going to be in the final mix. Well, actually, you know what? It might be, because screwing around and talking about it actually helps me a lot as far as thinking through my thought process, because I don't have to think about it a lot. But so let's say we got a vocal. The human voice is one of the most dynamic instruments in the universe. So we're gonna want to try to compress it a little bit. I'm usually more of a quick release guy, and this is a 100 millisecond release, which is pretty standard for some stuff, but some stuff you need it to be way quicker, especially for drums and transient stuff like that. But, you know, right now, I don't mind that. I'm going to give it a little more output volume, and then I'm going to try to get rid of as much of the cymbal bleed and stuff as I can without killing the top end of the vocal. And actually, they actually got rid of a lot of that wash without really taking too much away from what he's doing. It's an interesting like metric to know, but the highest note on a piano's fundamental is 4K, which is right there. So a grand piano, the sparkliest notes, that's right around where the highest note is. So you can actually high pass and low pass actually a lot without really losing too much. The other thing I kind of want to do to Robert's vocal, I'm gonna give him a little bit of growl down here. I prefer low end stuff in bell. I think what I do, if I should click this in bell, I don't know. I prefer it in bell. Who knows the darkness? And the reason for that is because I don't inadvertently boost a bunch of subsonics that's going to fight around with my kick drum. But again, for right now, we're not really too stressed out about that, so we're just going to let it be bell, and I'm going to make sure I'm actually right about that, because that would be a pretty stupid thing to do. And listen, this is an RTFM adjustment, and you got to do it sometimes, man. There's no shame in knowing what you don't know, and anybody who tells you that they know everything is probably lying or a total dick. So let me just make sure I'm actually right about this. Where is it? Oh man. Okay, so maybe I've been using it wrong the whole time. I don't know. Whatever. If not, we'll cut this out and I'll lie to you guys about it. So anyway, we're gonna give him a little love in there, and then we're gonna try to isolate the "you suck" frequency. It's right around 500 hertz. Let's try there for now. One track mind, keep it safe until I can't sleep. A little tighter Q. We'll give him a little bit of love up there. Okay, so we should have a little more Robert in there. Who knows the secret? Who knows? And since it's a live recording, we can always double check the phase. Who knows the number? Who knows the chord? And I'm not hearing a huge difference with the phase, but you know, I'm also monitoring on headphones, so it could be there if I popped it on the focals. But you know what? Who knows the darkness? Yeah, it's a little bit cleaner out of phase. Who knows the man? Maybe not as woofy, but it's a little bit more present. So we might need that later on, but we might not. So now let's get into the cool stuff that this thing can do to actually have some fun. We're just gonna grab a snare drum. I got a snare top, snare bottom, and a snare side on this particular recording. I kept trying to do the snare side thing. It's really just push right into the shell of the snare. It's always dynamic. It's like a 58 or a high LPR 20 or something, you know, like a general vocal style mic. And it's just never really that much fun. It's got a little bit of everything into it, but not enough of cool stuff that it ever really ends up doing too much of the mix. So let's talk about the snare top. Let's grab our friend, the 4000E. Okay, so here's one of the big things that SSL did when this came out that wasn't really a thing at the time. They put the dynamic section in the way the console comes out of the box, quote unquote, it's a big ass crate. They put the dynamic section first and then the EQ section. And that might not seem like a super big deal, but it works for me anyway on transients and drums better. For some reason, having the compressor hit before the EQ just makes it cooler sounding. And there's no technical anything about this, but it just does. So here's our snare, our about dumb snare. Let me just bring this guy up a little bit. There we go. So, okay, cool. So right now, nothing's really doing anything. Even the expander's not really doing anything, which tells you how low this threshold actually is for something like this. So let's make the snare cool. So 5 to 1 is a little bit hot for me. You see the overhead light up, or sorry, overload. So we're gonna just kind of beat the crap out of it a little bit. So, and the other thing that SSL had is it had a little like analog computer in there that sort of automatically compensated for how much gain reduction was happening. So you got you're hitting like 10 dB of gain reduction there. But if you bring this thing back down to 0, like the actual kind of relative level is still pretty close to where it was before. I mean, you can definitely hear the compression happening, but it's automatically compensating for the gain reduction that you're doing. So sometimes that's great, sometimes it's not so great, but that's just kind of what it's doing. We're hitting 10 dB of gain reduction, and it's really not screwing around with my life too much. This is also what 400 milliseconds of release time. I kind of prefer quicker release times, like I was saying, and sometimes it'll bring the noise up. But to me, like if I was starting to hit this thing really hard, I feel like the release time is going to give me more of an impact. The slower release time starts to kind of choke the drum a little bit to me. So I'll have it go like this, and 14 dB, and it's just kind of doing its thing. The other thing, again, the THD we got, crank the input gain up just because more is more, right? Overload light hitting, but it still sounds like a cool snare drum. And if I popped it back into the... See, now we can hear we got phase going on because all that depth of the drum has gone away. So we're going to try this guy.
Who knows the monster? Who knows the flame?
But there's our drum, and there's a ton of phase stuff happening. I've got, good God, I got 4 tom mics, hi-hat, overhead, cascades per element. I haven't checked any of the phase in this stuff. I haven't even listened to this since I literally pulled the session up. Well, and asked Robert, it was cool. But we had a talkback mic on the drums too, and that thing can cause all sorts of drama.
One track mind keep me safe until I can't sleep. I know disgrace is coming for me. One track.
So for a snare top, I'm really not mad at that. I'm gonna take out some of the subsonic stuff, and I'm gonna bring a little bit of the cymbal rattle out, and then let's talk about our gate for a second. Again, it's a snare drum. It's a transient. It happens really quick and then goes away. Actually, we can zoom a little bit more in on that if you guys want to check it out. Like there's my snare top transient, and see if it's even a little clipped. I was hitting it with a 1073 style preamp, so I almost always just clip it a little bit on the way in. I think we were using a Chameleon Labs 7602, and it just sort of takes that infinite amount of transient off of the top, because there's not a lot of sound systems, or especially consumers, who are going to want to listen to that. So that's just my choice. Like my nickname back when I used to actually mix on a desk like this was called King of the Red Lights, because every red light on the machine was lit up. And they come in and the producers would be like, "What are you doing?" And I'd be like, "Well, does it sound good?" And they're like, "Yeah, but all the red lights are on." And we'd be like, "Well, does it sound good?" And they'd be like, "Okay, fine." So anyway, we got a snare top, the snare bottom, which is a lot of rattle, but it can also add a lot of impact. The difference between there and there, and that'll come out in the mix when it starts to happen, because none of this stuff works by itself. I'm just kind of isolating it so that we can talk about it in a little bit more focused way. But this is not the way to EQ a snare drum. EQ it as close to in the mix as you can, because that's gonna tell you where all your problems are. Because nobody's like, "Man, I bought that record. It was just a snare drum mic for 45 minutes and it was great." Like, no one says that, not even God. So okay, so we're gonna give the snare drum a little more depth kind of in there. I mean, like, you can hear when we go off the bell, there's a little bit more low end extension down there. So, that's a choice you can make, especially if you have a lot better isolation than I had, because we had a bunch of people just jamming in the room. That was just the way they were most comfortable recording. So that's the way we did it. So let's talk about this gate. All right, this thing is wide the hell open. Let's just bring it up. Quick release. Because even if the drum gets a little bit choked by the gate, if you're using a live drum set, you should have some space around the drum in like the overheads and some of the room mics. So I'm really not mad at that snare drum sound right now, honestly. We might want to take a little honk out of this bit, just a little bit maybe. Will be a little smoother, and then maybe a little crack up in this area. But this is where your hi-hat starts to bleed into that drum mic. And that's why these gates are so freaking handy. So the way, again, SSL was also the first company that had gates and compressors on basically every channel on the whole desk. So engineers just started to go crazy, and that's what started to, those really in-your-face hyper-compressed drum sounds started to happen because you could, basically. You can like crank this guy down some more if you really want to. I don't mind that, actually. I don't know if it's gonna work for this or not, but it might be kind of cool. So again, yes, personally, I don't really mess with the V gain too much. How it comes sounds good to me, so I haven't really screwed around with it. Yeah, to me, that's not really, for this particular source, it's got a little bit more hair on it when you do this. But not a ton, especially on an isolated source. But the PhD, again, this little guy, that's cool. You can hear the upper mid distortion sort of coming out. So, and I really want the snare to be low end focused. So I'm gonna kind of be back here in it. I want that hit you right in the chest kind of vibe with the snare. And I don't know if any of these settings are gonna stay for anything else I'm doing, but who knows? It's cool, and it works for me right now. So let's go ahead and...
Who knows the name? Who knows?
Yeah, I don't mind that. And sometimes I'll even start with just copying over what I did on the snare top to the snare bottom. Woof! That's
Who knows
toasty.
the name? Who knows the rules?
So I don't want any of that top, because this snare bottom's already got it in there. But
who knows the name? Who knows?
Snare bottoms are always a little finicky for me, so who knows if this is going to stay, but the gate timing is working pretty well for me right now. So I'm into it. And you can hear the tightness when you mess with the phase of the two microphones working together, because they're just right, one's right on top of the snare, kind of at a 30, 35, 40 degree angle, and then one's just right up on the bottom. The big thing with the bottom snare mic is you don't want it to point right at the snares, the actual strainers themselves. It's just the worst. It sounds like the wrong kind of white noise. So if we go back to this guy,
who knows?
One of the big things we're missing is the kick drum. There it is. Sounds like it's a pretty boring sounding kick drum. Let's not lie. It is right now anyway, because we haven't allowed it to have any mojo. Kick. Yeah, my kick out mic sounds even worse. It's just nothing but woof down there. Which is fine, because we can help it out with this with our friend, the SSL G series plugin, or E series, excuse me. I demoed the G series, and I just didn't find enough that was really made that much of a difference, and it's probably just because I was used to the E series for so long. When I say it was an EG plus, the G plus was a computer that got upgraded, but all the circuitry was in E. So, all right, we got cool guy kick drum. You always want to boost a little bit of the low end. But again, since on the SSL we're boosting the EQ and cutting stuff post-compression, it keeps it a little more under control as opposed to just boosting the crap out of something that's going to have a ton of subsonics in it, like a regular kick drum would. I try to look at the high-pass filter between 35 and 50 hertz, depending on how crazy it is. Because again, we're just trying to cut out the subsonics, cut out the stuff that most people speakers, and even most converters don't really know what to do with. So there's no reason for it to be down there, especially if we can kind of fake it and give it some kind of weird subsonics. This way, you want to have the energy in the low end, but you don't want that weird woof when you finally pop it on a system, like a club system that's got huge subs, and you suddenly all you hear is this because there's too much crud down there that you couldn't really tell. And it's hard because listening to low end is a total pain in the ass in most studios, except the crazy big $1 million ones, because it's usually too small and the low end just bounces around like crazy, and it's hard to tell what's going on. So anyway, we're gonna go back to the regular compression thing. We're gonna kick it a little bit. I try not to over compress kick drums if I can avoid it. Like, I don't mind that so much. 3, 5, quick release again because it's transient, it's coming in real quick, and I want it to be able to speak with the power that a kick drum's supposed to have. And then we'll look at our gate. And we can always bring external gates into this thing, but this guy's got a pretty solid one. It's just kind of cleaning up the audio a little bit, Go back to 0. Just taking some little things out that you might not necessarily realize is there, but hey, let's get rid of it because it adds up, especially with a live drum track. I mean, this one's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 mics on it. So every little bit counts getting rid of stuff. And then back to this guy, I'll tighten up the bandwidth just a little bit and start getting rid of this low mid crud. And I guess this really doesn't have a ton to do with this particular plugin. It's just kind of what I do, and it's sort of programmed to do it. And then I will, let's hit it just a little bit harder. Let's get a little more. There you go. You can start to, the THD is cool in this one. It's really adding some bloom, some space around the drum. Because a really great kick drum sound is awesome, but what people don't do when they're listening to it is like nobody has their ear right next to the drum, so you have to sort of make it sound like it's in a space, and adding a little bit of that bloom with the THD is actually kind of like I'm into it. And look at, and that overload light is just going crazy, but you know what, I think it sounds like a cool kick drum. Again, I'm listening on headphones, so it might not in real life, but this is something you could totally do. If it works too well, you don't like it, then crank it down. It's all good. You can do anything. That's the best part about music. There's something for everybody. And then the other thing I like to do, especially in like a denser rock mix, is boost a bunch up here when you can, because it'll just kind of move. It feels like it's moving more air, even though the kick drum's not really that much louder.
Who knows the game?
And then again, you can just crank it here.
Who knows
Bring this
the
guy
name?
down.
Who knows the rules? Who knows the game?
So I don't mind that right now. I mean, I haven't really touched anything but the kick and snare, but overall, I mean, I'm not upset about the progress. I feel like I have everything I need here. Then I wouldn't need much more than this. Like when I'm tracking, I'll just put one on every channel, because the latency is super low. Like I'll go here in Pro Tools, we're at 88 samples of latency, and I know the video and the audio I'm playing back are a little bit out of sync, but I'm at like 512 buffer size in this guy, so I can track with a band at 512 or 256 with a bunch of instances of this and be able to like mess around with the settings and the programming, not the programming, just each plugin as the band is tracking, because there's nothing that gives you a shot in the arm like somebody like a band walking in from a take that they kind of maybe weren't that into or still trying to get the feel of, and all your little dirty tricks you can do with the plugins and the EQing and make it sound as close to a record as you can. It just gives them everybody gets excited, and you want an excited artist. You want somebody who's looking forward to it. And if it comes out just kind of super flat and not that interesting, I mean, sometimes it happens, there's just nothing you can do. But if you can, whatever you can do to make it sort of be more exciting when they hear the playback, because that's like the moment of truth for the band, especially the first couple times. They do the first take, they come in from the room, you hit play, and everybody goes, wow, we sound so much better than I thought. That's your job right there, is to make it sound better than they think they sound. So yeah. Other than that, about this plugin specifically, I know this went way longer than I thought, so I'm really sorry about that, guys. The other thing I love about this particular plugin, the Plugin Alliance one, is this fader, because I know it affects the sound in a pretty minimal way. At least that's what I've noticed. but I can basically get my static mix going with these faders before I touch the automation in Pro Tools. And the advantage of that is let's say I have 5 songs to mix in an EP, that's what I was working on earlier today. I'll get my basic levels done with this output fader, unless there's like a dramatic difference, which usually there's not. And so the static mix is about 80% of what I want, and then I can start adding automation. So that way, when I pull in the settings from these plugins and import them to the other songs, I'm way closer to where I would be level wise and mix wise than I would be just pulling the plugin off and starting from scratch. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Like sometimes the trim plugin is the better way to go. There's other things that can do this, but I do really love that plugin for that, especially on toms that really don't have to move around that much because you're sort of treating them as a unit. You can balance them out, especially with top and bottom plugins, and then use a master fader or a bus to control like the dynamics of the toms. Key input. I mean, pretty sure everybody knows what that means. That means you can send it from a bus. Like if you were trying to trigger the outside kick drum here off of the inside kick drum, you would just go bus. Let's just say bus 1 because why not? And then set your key input here to bus 1. Oh no, I'm bussing my own self. How about that? There we go. Well, I'm going to take this off, and you can see this guy.
Who knows the name? Who knows the rules?
It's working. Oh, is it just because I'm stupid? Okay. Yeah, I totally had that routed wrong. Anyway, so the bus input's coming from there. It's coming from the kick drum. There's a known issue in Pro Tools sometimes. Well, not sometimes. If you're not on an HDX system where the timing of the kick in, or not the kick in, the bus and the side chains get a little bit off. If you're using a ton of plugins, which can be a total nightmare. Oh, here's a good example of phase. Boom. Flip the phase. Ooh, regular phase goes away. And then suddenly the kick out mic is actually doing something. So that filter on the kick out mic will be way different. And you can hear the gate working its butt off. So, especially for a kick out mic, all you're really looking for is that low end woof on the kick drum. So your release will be really fast on the gate. Cool. And so now, like I said, the SSLs had the dynamic section before the EQ section, but you can actually, it's not by default, but you can put the EQ section ahead of the dynamic section, and we can listen to what that sounds like real quick. All right, let's go back to snare. So you can hear what we got for the snare sound. Might not be perfect, might not be your favorite, but it's not bad. So I feel like my compression and gating are considerably cleaner when I'm using the compressor and the gate or expander before the actual EQ. And that's really kind of a personal preference thing, but when I discovered that completely by accident, it was definitely cool. The only thing else I personally use all the time is the dynamic sidechain in there. Sometimes if you've got a lot of subsonics and you don't need the filters so much, you can make these guys trigger the gate and compressor. It's a little bit cleaner sounding because it's not trying to trigger off the super low end stuff. In fact, I might actually keep it that way. But it's really just kind of something you got to mess around with and figure out personal preferences. So yeah, I hope that was somewhat interesting to you guys, even though it was a little long-winded. So I apologize for that. Definitely not a quick video. And we can go over more if there's any more questions. I mean, this thing can do a ton of stuff. Like, there's a reason this is modeled over some of the most popular and famous recording consoles ever made. Like the green and brown EQ thing, or that this guy does. That's its own controversy. So maybe we'll get into that later. But there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of discussion about it on the interwebs. If you want to look up the SSL brown versus black EQ, you might go down a rabbit hole that I cannot help you from. Anyway, thank you guys very much. Hope this was relatively interesting. If it wasn't, sorry. But I actually learned a lot messing around with this thing kind of in a vacuum and not with a bunch of clients standing behind me. So thank you very much. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. welcome to Alpaca Ranch. Goodbye from Alpaca Ranch, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to you soon in the future. All right, thanks. Bye.